Hello, welcome back to our study of B101. We are going to continue looking into this agreement, and we are continuing where we stopped. And this is Article 3, Scope of Architects' Basic Services. Before we dive into it, you can see that this article is pretty darn long, and it sort of defines your duties as an architect during the project. So Article 1 and 2 spoke about homework that the owner and architect need to do prior to signing the agreement. And now we are going deep into the process of delivering the project. So here we go. 3.1. The architect's-based services consist of those described in this Article 3 and include usual and customary structural, mechanical, and electrical engineering services. Services not set forth in this Article 3 are supplemental or additional services. We talked about this a little bit before, but this paragraph tells you there's more to come. 3.1.1. The architect shall manage the architect's services, research applicable design criteria, attend project meetings, communicate with members of the project team, and report progress to the owner. Pretty self-explanatory. 3.1.2. The architect shall coordinate its services with those services provided by the owner and the owner's consultants. The architect shall be entitled to rely on and shall not be responsible for the accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of services and information furnished by the owner and the owner's consultants. So let's pause for a second here. A lot of times I saw questions that were essentially asking if the architect is responsible for accuracy of a geotechnical report or something. And this paragraph tells you absolutely not. So in this, I think this paragraph is a good exercise of looking for actual exact meanings of words. So you can see that in the second sentence, it says the architect shall be entitled to rely on. So that means that the architect should take their work for granted, and it's not architect's job to be looking for mistakes, looking for inconsistencies in their work. That's certainly the owner's responsibility. The architect shall provide prompt written notice to the owner if the architect becomes aware of any error, omission, or inconsistency in such services or information. So this means that you're not actively looking for them, but if in case you see something super glaringly wrong, you need to let the owner know. So I think this paragraph is one of the more important ones because, in a sense, it also says that if you get like a site survey or something, and then you have your elevations and all your grading designed and organized per this site survey, and then it turns out that suddenly your floor is not at the right your like floor level does not have the right relationship with the ground. So whose fault is that? It's not yours. It's going to be the owner's consultant. 3.1.3. As soon as practicable after the date of this agreement, the architect shall submit for the owner's approval a schedule for the performance of the architect services. The schedule initially shall include anticipated dates for the commencement of construction and for substantial completion of the work as set forth in the initial information. The owner's consultants and for approval of submissions by authorities having jurisdiction over the project. Once approved by the owner, time limits established by the schedule shall not, except for reasonable cause, be exceeded by the architect or owner. With the owner's approval, the architect shall adjust the schedule, if necessary, as the project proceeds with the commencement of construction. So another very important paragraph that says that as the architect, you essentially, before you commence any work, you need to tell the owner, kind of share with the owner a certain timetable that says, this is when this step is going to happen. This is when I need your response by. And as you can see, this is a pretty big deal because if it goes to the owner approves it, and then things happen and it has to be changed, you need to write again to the owner and ask for their approval of the update. 3.1.4, the architect shall not be responsible for an owner's directive or substitution, or for the owner's acceptance of non-conforming work made or given without the architect's written approval. So I really like this paragraph because it essentially says that, I mean, it happens quite a bit in real life that you, as an architect, you go to visit the site and you see something that doesn't look right, and you see something that is actually not the way you design intended to be, and you go to the contractor and you just say something, and the contractor says to you, I talked to the owner about this and the owner was fine. And that's a sucky situation to be in. But essentially, this paragraph says that if owner goes to the contractor and says, hey, I'm okay with you just putting a single pane window rather than two pane window. And then, I mean, obviously I'm exaggerating here, okay? But then later on, you don't achieve the LEED certification as you wanted to, or something happens because you use single pane rather than double pane, and then the owner goes like, but it's not your fault because you as an architect did not approve that, and the owner said they were okay with that. And me saying that, I don't mean to make fun of the owner or anyone who's in a bad situation, but it's just the nature of the way the agreement is set up, right? It kind of gets the owner on the hook for anything that they do without the architect's approval. Okay, 3.1.5. The architect shall contact governmental authorities required to approve the construction documents and entities providing utility services to the project. The architect shall respond to applicable design requirements imposed by those authorities and entities. So sometimes you will submit your drawings to a state review or something if you're working on a state project, and the board will come back to you with their comments, and they will say, I mean, they can even have some comments that are related to code, where they think that you're not being compliant, and then it's your job to address all the comments that they have. 3.1.6, the architect shall assist the owner in connection with the owner's responsibility for filing documents required for the approval of governmental authorities having jurisdiction over the project. Now, when I read this, I scout for these words, and the word that stands out to me here is assist. Assist. It's not it doesn't say that it's the architect's responsibility to do all these things, but the architect is also described here as somebody who does not have any sort of legal authority. It is somebody who assists, and whoever assists you means that that person has certain knowledge, but it does not have a legal authority to do what you are supposed to do. So keep in mind to kind of, that it's always a good idea to kind of be looking for these words and looking for these verbs and really understanding what they mean, and more importantly, what they don't mean. Okay, now 3.2, schematic design phase services. 3.2.1. The architect shall review the program and the other information furnished by the owner and shall review laws, codes, and regulations applicable to the architect services. Pretty straightforward. That's part of your job within schematic design. 3.2.2. The architect shall prepare a preliminary evaluation of the owner's program, schedule, budget for the cost of the work, project site, and proposed procurement and delivery method, and other initial information, each in terms of to ascertain the requirements of the project. The architect shall notify the owner of 1. Any inconsistencies discovered in the information, and 2. Other information or consulting services that may be reasonably needed for the project. So the way I read this is that it is the architect's job to be on top of everything that was listed in Article 1 and 2, and obviously it's not architect's responsibility to coordinate everything, but to have good solid knowledge and understanding of what's going on and notify the owner if the architect sees something that is not right. And again, we are coming back to this keyword assist. So this is another way of architect assisting the owner in getting the project done in the right way. 3.2.3, the architect shall present its preliminary evaluation to the owner and shall discuss with the owner alternative approaches to design and construction of the project. And if we go back to that page 11, we will see that multiple preliminary designs is listed here as a supplemental service. So what this tells you essentially is that you as an architect, part of your basic service is just to provide one design that then gets carried over. If the owner wants multiple preliminary designs, then you gotta be like supplemental services, you gotta pay for that. Now, obviously, in real life, that's not always the case, but the way this agreement is structured is it would suggest that as part of the basic services, it's just one design. Okay, where were we? Okay. Back to 3.2.3. The architect, I'll just read this part again. The architect shall present its preliminary evaluation to the owner and shall discuss with the owner alternative approaches to design and construction to the project. The architect shall reach an understanding with the owner regarding the requirements of the project. Pretty self-explanatory. 3.2.4. Based on the project requirements agreed upon with the owner, the architect shall prepare and present for the owner's approval a preliminary design illustrating the scale and relationship of the project components. So it's just one design, one preliminary design. And that design is coming after agreeing with the owner on these project requirements. 3.2.5. Based on the owner's approval of the preliminary design, the architect shall prepare schematic design documents for the owner's approval. So let's pause for a second. So what this means is that the earliest stage of schematic design phase is this preliminary design, in which, as you saw, essentially the owner says, yeah, I think I'm cool with that idea, that massing concept looks good to me. And then after that, after the owner approves, you prepare schematic design documents that will then need to be approved by the owner. These schematic design documents shall consist of drawings and other documents, including a site plan, if appropriate, and preliminary building plans, sections, and elevations, and may include some combination of study models, perspective sketches, or digital representations, renderings. Preliminary sections of major building systems and construction materials shall be noted on the drawings or described in writing. So this paragraph is pretty important because it essentially tells you what you need to deliver as part of your SD phase. I think just as it is important to know what you do need to deliver, you also need to know what is still too early to be delivered, what you don't need to deliver at this time. And then, as you can see, there are no specs. You don't need to know any system, like it says preliminary selections of major building systems. But that's very kind of fluffy, and you don't need to know, oh, I'm gonna have I don't know, like Finkel units, or I'm going to have all air, or whatever. At this point, you don't need to, you're not really required to have all this figured out. 3.2.5.1, the architect shall consider sustainable design alternatives, such as material choices and building orientation, together with other considerations based on program and aesthetics, in developing a design that is consistent with the owner's program, schedule, and budget for the cost of the work. The owner may obtain more advanced sustainable design services as a supplemental service under section 4.1.1. Again, let's kind of look into the verbiage that they use here. And one verb that stands out to me here is in the first sentence, is consider. So consider is kind of pretty weak. It's kind of like, you can do it, but you don't have to. And there is no way, I mean, I guess I cannot really think of a way that like somebody could argue, oh, they did not consider this. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to prove, but I guess I just kind of want to emphasize that architect is encouraged to think sustainable towards sustainability, but not really required. And this also kind of tells you that AIA still kind of has a long way to go to kind of catch up with sustainability goals of contemporary world. 3.2.5.2, the architect shall consider the value of alternative materials, building systems, and equipment, together with other considerations based on program and aesthetics, in developing a design for the project that is consistent with the owner's program, schedule, and budget for the cost of work. So it's pretty much the same as the previous paragraph. Again, it's that word consider, that kind of sounds nice, but it doesn't really create some sort of serious obligation, I guess. 3.2.6, the architect shall submit to the owner an estimate of the cost of the work prepared in accordance with section 6.3. So you will see that essentially after both SD and DD, the architect needs to submit a cost estimate as essentially part of your delivery of at the end of that phase. Now, certainly if the owner engages somebody else on the project, and by that I mean, I don't know, CNC or CNA, they can do this part and you don't necessarily need to do extensive estimates of cost of work. But if there's nobody else on the board, it is indeed architect's responsibility to deliver these cost estimates at the end of these phases. And then 3.2.7, the architect shall submit the schematic design documents to the owner and request the owner's approval. Now we're moving on to design development phase services, 3.3. 3.3.1. Based on the owner's approval of the schematic design documents and on the owner's authorization of any adjustments in the project requirements and the budget for the cost of the work, the architect shall prepare design development documents for the owner's approval. So there are two words that I'm seeing here that are pretty important. One is approval, and the other one is authorization. So what they mean here is that you essentially really need to wait for the owner's approval and authorization to move forward based on what you submitted or based on anything that you and the owner decided that it needs to be different from the way you thought it would previously be. The design development documents shall illustrate and describe the development of the approved schematic design documents. Okay, we know that. And shall consist of drawings and other documents, including, this is again another list, plans, sections, elevations, typical construction details, and diagrammatic layouts of building systems to fix and describe the size and character of the project as to architectural, structural, mechanical, and electrical systems and other appropriate elements. So it's a good idea to have kind of two lists here. One is what you need to deliver for SD, one is what you need to deliver for DD, and then just kind of see how that list grows and what is getting added to it. So right away, we can say that you need to have a much better understanding of the systems that you're using. So it says architectural, structural, mechanical, and electrical, and other appropriate elements. And also, it is asking for typical construction details. So you can see that we're slowly diving into more serious stuff, but not too deep just yet because it says, and diagrammatic layouts of building systems. So you kind of need to develop an understanding of like how tall your ceilings need to be, because if your ducts are sized to be a certain way, naturally that is going to impact where your ceiling is going to be, and so on. So DD phase is when your engineers are really starting to come on board and you start coordinating them all with what they are doing and then what you're trying to do. The design development documents shall also include outline specifications that identify major materials and systems and establish, in general, their quality levels. So yes, in DD, you need to outline your specs as well and just mention, as it says here, all the major components of, of, of the specs and quality levels of materials and systems. 3.3.2. The architect shall update the estimate of the cost of the work prepared in accordance with section 6.3. So you can see a pattern here. At the end of SD, you were supposed to deliver a cost estimate. At the end of DD, you're supposed to update that cost estimate. Then 3.3.3, the architect shall submit the design development documents to the owner, advise the owner of any adjustments to the estimate of the cost of the work, and request the owner's approval. So essentially, this is very similar to 3.2.7. And again, we're saying that you submit everything to the owner and wait for the owner's approval. And that essentially concludes DD. And then we're moving into construction documents phase. That's 3.4. 3.4.1. Based on the owner's approval of the design development documents, approval, and the owner's authorization of any adjustments in the project requirements and the budget of the cost of the work, the architect shall prepare construction documents for the owner's approval. Essentially, same sentence as in 3.3.1, just a different phase. The construction documents shall illustrate and describe the further development of the approved design development documents and shall consist of drawings and specifications, setting forth in detail the quality levels and performance criteria of materials and systems and other requirements for the construction of the work. So this pretty much is telling you that you need to provide a lot more details in general and also in your specs. The owner and architect acknowledge that in order to perform the work is capitalized, so you need to know what that means. The contractor will provide additional information, including shop drawings, product data, samples, and other similar submittals, which the architect shall review in accordance with section 3.6.4. So this is just kind of giving you a heads up that the architect, even though they submit, I guess a good example could be cabinetry, like cabinets. So when you are in your CDs and you are looking at cabinets for a kitchen or something, and you will provide elevations and you may provide a section detail to show, I don't know, that there is an outlet behind a cabinet or something, and then there is a shelf in there. But that does not mean that those cabinets are going to be manufactured per that specific detail that you provided. What's going to happen later on is that you are going to have a contractor that is going to have a subcontractor who is going to be building these cabinets. And then whoever is building those cabinets, before they start building them, they are actually going to draw them, like in a way that will allow them to build those cabinets, because what you provided in your documents is not really enough. It's not detailed enough for them. And then this cabinetry sub is going to send those drawings and information that they did for themselves to the contractor. And then the contractor will send those drawings to you, the architect, and then you will look at these shop drawings essentially, and you will look at them against your details and see if the design intent matches essentially. And that's this paragraph essentially says that this is what you're going to be doing as well. Okay. Then 3.4.2, the architect shall incorporate the design requirements of governmental authorities having jurisdiction over the project into the construction documents. I think we saw this also already. Again, you submit your documents for review to these authorities and agencies, and they come back to you with comments, and you have to implement them and address them. 3.4.3, during the development of the construction documents, the architect shall assist the owner in the development and preparation of. And then again, we have assist. 1. Procurement information that describes the time, place, and condition of bidding, including bidding or proposal forms. 2. The form of agreement between the owner and contractor. And 3. The conditions of the contract for construction, general, supplementary, and other conditions. The architect shall also compile a project manual that includes the conditions of the contract for construction and specifications, and may include bidding requirements and sample forms. So again, here we're coming back to being really careful about the way things are worded. So here we're talking about essentially what needs to happen before the bidding or negotiation or whatever owner decides to do. What needs to happen before that? So the architect is assistant, not doing anything instead of the owner, really. So that's, yeah, just kind of fishing for these words is pretty important. So assist. Okay. Then 3.4.4, the architect shall update the estimate of the cost of the work prepared in accordance with section 6.3. Just like with SD and DD, you need to update your cost estimates and send those to the owner for approval. 3.4.5, the architect shall submit the construction documents to the owner, advise the owner of any adjustments to the estimate of the cost of the work, take any action required under section 6.5, and request the owner's approval, same as before. So I think it's kind of like important to sort of pause here a little bit and then understand what you are expected to deliver for each phase, and understand that after each phase you need to submit cost of your updated estimate of cost, and just wait for the owner's approval. Then 3.5, procurement phase services. 3.5.1, general. The architect shall assist the owner in establishing a list of prospective contractors. Following the owner's approval of the construction documents, the architect shall assist the owner in 1. Obtaining either competitive bids or negotiated proposals. And you should be familiar with what competitive bid means and what negotiated proposal means. 2. Confirming responsiveness of bids or proposals. And 3, determining the successful bid or proposal, if any. And 4, awarding and preparing contracts for construction. So you should be familiar with this terminology that I mentioned, but again, I kind of want to emphasize that part of architects' basic service is to assist with these with these processes essentially, and considering the responsibility that they carry, you can't really expect an architect to give the owner like a list of potential bidders, because the owner can then blame the architect for like, oh, you didn't include this guy, and or something can happen like that neither bid comes close or neither bid is successful, and then the owner would say, well, it's your fault because you didn't put the right people on the list, and now the whole project is late and we're falling behind, and it's your fault. So this paragraph says that what I just described cannot happen because the architect is owner's assistant. 3.5.2, competitive bidding. 3.5.2.1, bidding documents shall consist of bidding requirements and proposed contract documents. 3.5.2.2, the architect shall assist the owner in bidding the project by: point 1, facilitating the distribution of bidding documents to prospective bidders. Point 2, organizing and conducting a pre-bid conference for prospective bidders. Point 3, preparing responses to questions from prospective bidders and providing clarifications and interpretations of the bidding documents to the prospective bidders in the form of addenda. And point 4, organizing and conducting the opening of the bids and subsequently documenting and distributing the bidding results as directed by the owner. So these are all the things that the architect will be assisting the owner. It's certainly a good idea to be very, very familiar with this. 3.5.2.3, if the bidding documents permit substitutions, upon the owner's written authorization, the architect shall, as an additional service, consider requests for substitutions and prepare and distribute addenda identifying approved substitution to all prospective bidders. Now, this paragraph here came because probably at some point it happened that the architect was assisting the owner, and then there were, I don't know, like let's say 5 bidders, and bidder number 2 submitted a question to the owner and said like, hey, I know that the architect specified this tile, but I have this tile here that's cheaper and it's better for maintenance, and can we substitute your specified tile for this tile? And then the owner is going to go to the architect, and the architect's job, as this paragraph says, is to study, as part of the supplemental service, to study this proposal and to come back to the owner and say, yes, I agree with that, or no, I don't agree with that. However, if the owner and architect agree upon the substitution, it is the architect's job to let all of these other bidders know that this substitution is allowed. So this is a pretty frequent question that happens in the practice, where you are asked what do you need to do if you have a question from a bidder. So the answer is you share your answer and the original question with all the bidders, so that everyone is dealing with the same information. Otherwise, you are creating imbalance there that somebody could sue you for. Then 3.5.3, negotiated proposals. 3.5.3.1, proposal documents shall consist of proposal requirements and proposed contract documents. Okay, it's the same as in competitive bidding. 3.5.3.2, the architect shall assist the owner in obtaining proposals by point 1, facilitating the distribution of proposal documents for distribution to prospective contractors and requesting their return upon completion of the negotiation processes. So if we start comparing this to 3.5.2.2, we can already see that in competitive bidding, they are talking about bidders, but with negotiated proposals, they're talking about prospective contractors. And that's already a little different, because if you have a bidder, that means that like a company that is completely unrelated to construction or anything could have a temporary contract with a contractor, but then the contractor works for the bidder, and then bidder is the one who bids the project. Versus for negotiated proposals, it's essentially that the owner is targeting potential contractors, and we will see how that unravels. But essentially, in reality, the owner can come to the architect and be like, well, I have this one friend that went to school with me and he is a contractor. I would really like to put him on the list for negotiated proposals. And then I guess your job is to kind of like, again, assist the owner in creating the list. So let's move on. Then we are point 2, organizing and participating in selection interviews with prospective contractors. Point 3, preparing responses to questions from prospective contractors and providing clarifications and interpretations of the proposal documents to the prospective contractors in the form of addenda. And point 4, participating in negotiations with prospective contractors and subsequently preparing a summary report of the negotiation results as directed by the owner. So yeah, this sort of like really summarizes what your duties are in case the owner wants to do negotiated proposals. So I guess, yeah, you need to be really familiar what the difference is between bidding and negotiating. And essentially, if you have bidding, is that anyone can, essentially anyone almost can bid for the project. And a lot of times this is used in state projects. And essentially, as an owner and architect, you will probably get to see, obviously, a lot of offers. And then depending on the way this is kind of legally constructed, obviously not in a B101, you you can certainly be required to take the lowest bid, but the lowest bid may not necessarily be the best bid, because you can totally have somebody who is just giving you a low price because they're desperate to get the job, and then later on they can elevate the price and you're in trouble. But there is this really nice legal term that is used, and that is the lowest bona fide bid. And by bona fide bid, I'm just pronouncing it the Latin way. not because I'm a dork, but because English is not my first language. But that essentially means that the lowest bona fide bid means that whoever gave you the offer, that person actually intends to deliver the project at that price. Because, and just that little like 2-word thing can protect you from somebody who is just lowballing you. Okay, I sidetracked there a little bit. We're back to 3.5.3.3. If the proposal documents permit substitutions upon the owner's written authorization, the architect shall, as an additional service, consider requests for substitutions and prepare and distribute addenda identifying approved substitutions to all prospective contractors. I mean, I think this is a good example to kind of prove that this AIA contract is biased towards architects, and that's not really surprising. And I mean that because in this paragraph and some other ones, like they are categorizing this as an additional service. And the chances, I mean, depending on the complexity of the project, chances are certainly that you are going to have requests for substitutions. And then just because the architect needs to study them, the architect needs to get paid extra for that. So yeah, which is, I don't know, it's kind of debatable, but it is what it is. 3.6, construction phase services. 3.6.1, general. 3.6.1.1. The architect shall provide administration of the contract between the owner and the contractor as set forth below and in the AIA document A201, general conditions of the contract for construction. If the owner and contractor modify AIA document A201, those modifications shall not affect the architect's services under this agreement unless the owner and the architect amend this agreement. So what this means is that it kind of creates a sort of a hierarchy of these relationships, like the way the relationships are controlled, I guess, because this A201 is not essential. It's a document. It's not necessary. It's not really a contract. It's not really something that anyone signs. So if you go to the end of A201, there's no space to sign it because essentially A201 is is essentially compiled book of game rules, essentially. So it's like, you know, when you buy Monopoly game, like you have rules that you need to follow. So this A201 provides these rules that that kind of create and define relationships between owner, architect, and contractor. But what this paragraph means is that something can be changed in A201, and if it's not updated in B101, which is what we're looking at right now, that means that A201 cannot trump B101. And the reason for that is pretty much because it's not, A201 is not signed. So I guess, yeah, one thing that is good to mention is that this AIA contract is certainly, it's a legal recommendation for how a project should be delivered. But the owner and architect can certainly agree on different terms, or they can agree to modify certain things and certain elements of this agreement. So essentially then what this paragraph says is that if you modify A201 about something that's pertinent to B101, but you forget to update the B101, the change does not apply. Okay, then 3.6.1.2, the architect shall advise and consult with the owner during the construction phase services. The architect shall have authority to act on behalf of the owner only to the extent provided in this agreement. The architect shall not have control over, charge of, or responsibility for the construction means, methods, techniques, sequences, or procedures, or for safety precautions and programs in connection with the work, nor shall the architect be responsible for the contractor's failure to perform the work in accordance with the requirements of the contract documents. This is probably one of more important sentences in this entire agreement because, you know, like how sometimes it's important to know what is included, but it's probably even more important to understand what is not included. So in this sentence, you are pretty much given a menu, a list of things that an architect is not responsible for. And it doesn't necessarily say who is responsible, but it says that it's not the architect's job to worry about these things. And I certainly recommend making a list of these things so that you can have a pretty quick and solid understanding. Okay, the architect shall be responsible for the architect's negligent acts or omissions, but shall not have control over or charge of, and shall not be responsible for acts or omissions of the contractor or any other persons or entities performing portions of the work. So essentially it's saying whatever is on the construction site, architect does not deal with it. It's not, I mean, it deals with it, but it's not responsible for. 3.6.1.3, subject to section 4.2 and except as provided in section 3.6.6.5, the architect's responsibility to provide construction phase services commences with the award of the project for construction and terminates on the date the architect issues the final certificate for payment. Again, another really, really important paragraph because, I mean, somebody would say, well, it states the obvious, but a lot of times people think or forget when your basic services end and where your construction administration services end. And this paragraph here clearly says it is on the date when the architect issues the final certificate for payment. So this means that in the process of closing the project, there are a few important dates, one of them being substantial completion. And I'm sure that there are people out there that may think that the architect's services end at the substantial completion, but this paragraph here is telling you that's not the case because substantial completion will happen on a certain date, but once architect approves substantial completion, once architect says, yes, I think this is substantially complete, only then will the architect issue this final certificate for payment. So it happens after substantial completion. And if you're not familiar with it, substantial completion is super, super important. And I'm sure we will talk about that. 3.6.2, evaluations of the work. Oh, dang, I forgot. I should have mentioned that this is another good opportunity to go look at page 11 and 12 and see actually what what other services can happen after issuing this final certificate of payment. So there's a lot of things, like you have these as constructed record drawings, post-occupancy evaluation, facility support services, tenant-related services. Like there's a lot of things that you can get paid to do after you issue this final certificate for payment. Going back to the right thing now. 3.6.2, evaluations of the work. 3.6.2.1, the architect shall visit the site at intervals appropriate to the stage of construction. So intervals appropriate to the stage of construction. It's pretty fluffy, right? It doesn't really say, oh, you need to go there 5 times in a month or whatever. It says appropriate to the stage of construction. Later in this agreement, we will provide, like this agreement will provide a little more definition, but I just kind of, for now, I want to emphasize that it's kind of fluffy. Appropriate to the stage of construction, or as otherwise required in section 4.2.3. There you go. To become generally familiar with the progress and quality of the portion of the work completed. Generally familiar, so nothing beyond that. And to determine, in general, if the work observed is being performed in a manner indicating that the work, when fully completed, will be in accordance with the contract documents. However, the architect shall not be required to make exhaustive or continuous on-site inspections. So you will see a lot of questions that will put inspections and architect in the same sentence, and you have to understand that the architect during construction is not really doing any inspections. Like the architect is doing site visits. To become generally familiar is not doing any inspections to check the quality or quantity of the work. I mean, the only inspection that the architect does is right before substantial completion, if that even can be called inspection. Because I mean, if you consider it, like inspection is a pretty strong word. On the basis of the site visits, the architect shall keep the owner reasonably informed about the progress and quality of the portion of the work completed, and promptly report to the owner: 1. Known deviations from the contract documents. 2. Known deviations from the most recent construction schedule submitted by the contractor. And 3. Defects and deficiencies observed in the work. So this means that if the owner sees that portion of the work is not adequately performed or something, the owner does not talk to the contractor, because owner and contractor don't have a signed agreement. So if the architect sees something, the architect is informing the owner in writing to describe any deficiencies. 3.6.2.2, the architect has the authority, so now architect has the authority to reject work that does not conform to the contract documents. So this is a pretty strong sentence, and in a sense, this sentence kind of creates an understanding that the architect's role is to be, in a sense, guardian of construction documents and guardian essentially of the contract. Whenever the architect considers it necessary or advisable, the architect shall have the authority, again authority, to require inspection or testing of the work in accordance with the provisions of the contract documents, whether or not the work is fabricated, installed, or completed. So yeah, this pretty much means that if the owner sees that, well, those joists look a little wonky or something like that, can you test that? And yeah, this is essentially telling you that architect has authority to ask for things to be tested and confirm that they are adequately done. Okay, where was I? However, neither this authority of the architect nor a decision made in good faith, either to exercise or not to exercise such authority, shall give rise to a duty or responsibility of the architect to the contractor, subcontractors, suppliers, their agents or employees, or other persons or entities performing portions of the work. So again, another sentence that sort of protects the architect a little bit. 3.6.2.3, the architect shall interpret and decide matters concerning performance under and requirements of the contract documents on written requests of either the owner or contractor. The architect's response to such requests shall be made in writing within time limits agreed upon or otherwise with reasonable promptness. So certainly during construction phase, the contractor is going to have questions. Like a contractor can say, well, your elevations are not really telling me where the outlet is going to go. And then, yeah, it's your job to respond to those questions with reasonable promptness. Again, like this is again a little fluffy, but reasonable promptness kind of can be 1 week, 2 weeks. It kind of depends, I guess. 3.6.2.4, interpretations and decisions of the architect shall be consistent with the intent of and reasonably inferable from the contract documents and shall be in writing or in form of drawings. When making such interpretations and decisions, the architect shall endeavor to secure faithful performance by both owner and contractor, shall not show partiality to either, and shall not be liable for results of interpretations or decisions rendered in good faith. The architect's decisions on matters relating to aesthetic effect, shall be final if consistent with the intent expressed in the contract documents. So this is telling you that the architect cannot be responsible for the way owner and contractor interpret certain things. And also it says that the architect is the main figure when it comes to anything aesthetics or related to design. 3.6.2.5, unless the owner and contractor designate another person to serve as an additional decision maker, as that term is defined in AIA document A201, the architect shall render initial decision on claims between the owner and contractor as provided in the contract documents. So this paragraph and the previous paragraph talk about situations in which you provided information and some miscommunication happened, and an owner interprets it this way and contractor interprets it another way, and what do you do then? The previous paragraph says that you really need to be impartial in these situations. When if you have a dispute or like a claim between the owner and the contractor, you as an initial decision maker need to be impartial, which, I mean, it sounds good in theory, but it can be a little tricky to do in real life, because essentially the owner is the person who pays you. So I mean, it's going to be tricky to not sort of take the owner's side, because as you can see so far throughout the contract, you are assisting the owner. So the owner is paying you. So imagine if this claim is happening because you, architect, made a mistake, and now you have to decide between the owner and the contractor. If you decide for the contractor, the owner is going to be like, well, you suck. Why am I paying you if you don't know how to do your job properly? But then on the other hand, if you say, well, I think I will vote for that the owner is right because the owner is paying me. But then contractor can say, well, you guys are ganging up against me. But in general, this here sort of illustrates that when it comes to design, bid, build process, that delivery method already sort of puts kind of creates by default tension between all these three parties, between well, I guess not between owner and the architect, or maybe yes, between like all three parties, because essentially the contractor is going to be most likely the lowest bid. So they are kind of putting themselves in somewhat adversarial position against like the architect, especially because they don't really have a contractual relationship between them. So, I mean, some hairy situations can certainly happen there. So, like, I mean, I could definitely imagine like contractor talking crap to the owner about the architect or vice versa. Um, and that's definitely not a good situation to be in. And ultimately, like relationships suffer and the project suffers. Okay, 3.6.2, evaluations of the work. 3.6.2.1, the architect shall visit the site at intervals appropriate to the stage of construction, or as otherwise required in section, oh, we said this already. 3.6.3, certificates for payment to contractor. 3.6.3.1, the architect shall review and certify the amounts due the contractor and shall issue certificates in such amounts. The architect's certification for payment shall constitute a representation to the owner based on the architect's evaluation of the work as provided in section 3.6.2 and on the data comprising the contractor's application for payment that, to the best of the architect's knowledge, information, and belief, the work has progressed to the point indicated, the quality of the work is in accordance with the contract documents, and that the contractor is entitled to payment in the amount certified. So this kind of like describes the procedure of how the contractor gets paid. So essentially, and you will see in A201, it will, and A101, it will be specified that, you know, just like the architect had to provide a schedule at the very beginning, part of the initial information, an SD, the same way the contractor will also provide what they call schedule of payment, which means that the contractor says, on this date I'm going to have this done and you're going to pay me this much. On this date I'm going to have this much done and you're going to pay me this much. And then it's the architect's job to, if they agree to do it as such, to go to the site, to visit the site, and just, again, we're not inspecting anything. We are, what was the way they formulated it? Generally familiar. So it's the architect's job to become generally familiar of the condition of work at the time when the contractor is asking to be paid. So the architect goes to the site and says, okay, this looks good to me, but there is this, this, and this that I don't think it's as completed as you say, and therefore, the owner, I will not issue the certificate that will include that work as well. And then the owner will essentially not pay you as much as you apply to be paid for because you just didn't finish that. And certainly there can be some like back and forth going in between those two, between architect and contractor, but essentially ideally you want the contractor to do what they said they would do in time when they said that they would do. The foregoing representations are subject to 1. An evaluation of the work for conformance with the contract documents upon substantial completion. 2. Results of subsequent tests and inspections. 3. Correction of minor deviations from the contract documents prior to completion. And 4. Specific qualifications expressed by the architect. So here they are listing the reasons why the architect could not issue this certificate of payment. So it's certainly a good idea to be familiar with this. 3.6.3.2, the issuance of a certificate for payment shall not be a representation that the architect has. Really, really important. Shall not be a representation that the architect has. 1. Made exhaustive or continuous on-site inspections to check the quality or quantity of the work. 2. Reviewed construction means, methods, techniques, sequences, or procedures. 3. Reviewed copies of requisitions received from subcontractors and suppliers and other data requested by the owners to substantiate the contractor's right to payment, or for ascertained how or for what purpose the contractor has used money previously paid on account of the contract sum. So again, one of the more important paragraphs in this agreement, because it says that even though the architect issues this certificate of payment, that does not mean that the architect has done all of these things that they just explained here. So it says that does not mean that the architect did an inspection, that it reviewed construction means, methods. It does not mean that it reviewed copies of requisitions received from subcontractors and suppliers requested by the owner. And it also, and this is also pretty cool, also it does not mean that the architect has made sure that the contractor has paid their subs. And the reason why this is here is that you could have a contractor that hires, let's say, 3 subs, and each sub is doing its own thing. And for some reason, the contractor falls into financial trouble. And the contractor gets money from the owner. But because the contractor is in financial trouble, the contractor cannot afford to pay their subs through that payment. And that sub can actually create a problem because they can file this mechanic lien. And what that means is that the sub does this legal motion essentially that requires the owner to, in a way, pay the sub directly. And this is certainly, and we will talk about this in, I believe, 8.201 or later. And this can create a lot of tension and a lot of confusion. And essentially, the main takeaway lesson is that you, in ideal case, you want your contractor to pay the subs, all the subs, but it's not architect's job to look into contractors' books to see and make sure that the subs were paid. And even though unpaid subs can create a problem for the owner through these liens, that is not architect's job to prevent from happening, if that makes sense. Okay, 3.6.3.3. The architect shall maintain a record of the applications and certificates for payment. That sort of makes sense, because it's again another thing that the architect is doing to assist the owner. 3.6.4, submittals. 3.6.4.1, the architect shall review the contractor's submittal schedule and shall not unreasonably delay or withhold approval of the schedule. And we can stop right here and say that submittals are essentially information, and we talked about this earlier when I used that example of cabinet sub. So at the beginning, before the construction starts, so pretty much at the same time when the contractor submits the schedule of payment, they also need to submit submittal schedule, which essentially maps out when certain submittals are going to be submitted. And what that means in reality is that you are going to have many submittals, right? I mean, depending on how complex the project is, you could have like hundreds of submittals. But this submittal schedule is going to be very tightly connected to the construction schedule. So by that, I mean that you are not going to get, I don't know, interior paint submittal before you get drywall submittal, because like whatever comes first in the construction sequence will also come first in the submittal schedule. So that is kind of like intertwined. And as you can see, it's contractor's job to submit a submittal schedule so that we all know well ahead how things are going to be coming in for the architect to review. And the architect shall review that schedule and not delay or withhold approval of the schedule. The architect's action in reviewing submittals shall be taken in accordance with the approved submittal schedule, or in the absence of an approved submittal schedule, with reasonable promptness while allowing sufficient time in the architect professional judgment to permit adequate review. Okay, 3.6.4.2, the architect shall review and approve or take other appropriate action upon the contractor's submittals, such as shop drawings, product data, and samples. So this is important because it's telling you types of submittals. So shop drawings, product data, and samples. And if you don't have work experience with any of these, it's certainly a good idea to speak to somebody in your company and ask to review some of these. Shop drawings will, I mean, you can see that all these terms are capitalized. You should know them. Shop drawings will, I mean, they will clearly define how things are going to be constructed. Use that cabinetry example that I mentioned. Product data. So product data is going to be a lot of times, like let's say you're reviewing product data for interior paint or something. So that product data is going to be telling you, oh, you have VOC content this much. And then you have to go into the lead requirements or not and see if those numbers match. So essentially, when it comes to product data, a lot of times you are comparing what you get from the contractor against your specs. So another example, I guess, would be if you have some sort of like fire rating or any kind of like element, or like something that can have um, like a smoke development. So I think another good example to think of product data in addition to this like interior paint could be if you're looking at some kind of like anything that's fire rating related. Those are really, really important submittals that you need to make sure that they compare really well against your specs so that you match all the numbers that need to match. And then samples. Samples are essentially like physical small samples, pieces of a larger component. A lot of times you will get, I don't know, tabletop or like countertop samples, carpet samples, and anything really. And then it's your job to say, oh, no, I don't really like that. It needs to be more like this. Or I actually remember on one of the jobs that I used to work for, our specs specified a certain, like a very specific paint producer. But then the contractor did not have a contract with that paint producer, but with another. And then they were trying to match the palette of this paint producer, because like in our specs we said we want this paint and this is the code of the paint and this one and this one and this one. But then it's contractor's job to look at that paint against their producer's palette and then match them up. And then as architects, it is our job then to look at their proposed colors and then be like, no, that's a little too blue, that's a little too warm. And that can go back and forth, which is certainly a waste of everyone's time. But it's kind of like in everyone's best interest to just kind of like not set each other these little traps like that, because but I guess in this case when we specified a certain producer but then the contractor does not carry that producer, like I felt they could have done a little better job or just kind of be more proactive about sitting down with us and be like, hey, let's get this done, rather than kind of going back and forth. Okay, a little digression there. Where were we? Review of such submittals is not for the purpose of determining the accuracy and completeness of other information, such as dimensions, quantities, and installation or performance of equipment or systems, which are the contractor's responsibility. Again, a really, really important sentence in this agreement. So if you ever look at a shop drawing and you are being asked, can you give me this dimension? Can you check this dimension? Check this quantity? Don't do it. It's not your job. Because essentially, your job is to be the guardian of the design intent. And I mean, a lot of times, like I see in construction drawings, like comments, field verify. Rather than like seeing a dimension, you will see field verify, which kind of really puts responsibility, emphasizes the responsibility of the contractor to go and actually be responsible for dimensions. The architect's review shall not constitute approval of safety precautions or construction means, methods, techniques, sequences, or procedures. The architect's approval of a specific item shall not indicate approval of an assembly of which the item is a component. Again, pretty important. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, sometimes it's more important to understand what is not your job than what is your job. Okay, 3.6.4.3. If the contract document specifically requires the owner to provide professional design services or certifications by a design professional related to systems, materials, or equipment, the architect shall specify the appropriate performance and design criteria that such services must satisfy. The architect shall review and take design professional, provided the submittals bear, the architect shall review and take appropriate action on shop drawings and other submittals related to the work designed or certified by the contractor's design professional, provided the submittals bear such professional seal and signature when submitted to the architect. The architect's review shall be for the limited purpose of checking for conformance with information given in the design concept expressed in the contract documents. Again, the architect is the guardian of design intent. The architect shall be entitled to rely upon, so again, a strong expression, entitled to rely upon, and shall not be responsible for the adequacy and accuracy of the services, certifications, and approvals performed or provided by such design professionals. So if you have shop drawings of these cabinets that are drawn by these design professionals, it's really not your job to go beyond just confirming that they look the way you intend them to look. That's it, the end of the story. 3.6.4.4, subject to section 4.2, the architect shall review and respond to requests for information about the contract documents. The architect shall set forth in the contract documents the requirements for requests for information. Requests for information shall include, at a minimum, a detailed written statement that indicates the specific drawings or specifications in need of clarification and the nature of the clarification requested. The architect's response to such requests shall be made in writing within any time limits agreed upon or otherwise with reasonable promptness. If appropriate, the architect shall prepare and issue supplemental drawings and specifications in response to the requests for information. So if you get a chance, and you should actually take a chance to actually ask people in your office if you can see these requests for information, just to familiarize yourself with what is really meant by this. A lot of times, like they are in architecture, like people use RFI as a jargon word for requests for information. And essentially the way it looks is that, as this paragraph sort of described it, is you will receive a short paragraph, hopefully short, from the contractor that will say, on this sheet, on sheet A546, your elevation is saying this, but on sheet A123, you are saying this, which does not agree with this elevation. Which one is right? And then it's your job to respond to that And then, if necessary, update these drawings so they match. And you have to do that in writing within any time limits agreed upon, or otherwise with reasonable promptness. Naturally, the contractor wants this information as soon as possible, but sometimes they're just overwhelmed with other projects, and or the question is too complicated and you have to ask 3 more people in the office and they're not available. So sometimes it can kind of like keep dragging on, but that's you want to be as prompt as possible. But then you also have situations in which the contractor and you are kind of like in a bad, you kind of have a bad blood in between each other, so kind of like delaying giving them this information may seem like a good idea because they did something bad to you, but again, essentially at the end of the day, the project suffers. So don't fall into those traps. 3.6.4.5, the architect shall maintain a record of submittals and copies of submittals supplied by the contractor in accordance with the requirements of the contract documents. So just like we were keeping a track of certificates of payments and applications for payments, we are also keeping a record of submittals. So we are guardians of design intent and of the contract. Okay, 3.6.5, changes in the work. 3.6.5.1, the architect may order minor changes in the work that are consistent with the intent of the contract documents and do not involve an adjustment in the contract sum or an extension of the contract time. Subject to section 4.2, the architect shall prepare change orders and construction change directives for the owner's approval and execution in accordance with contract documents. So this paragraph is telling you that if a change needs to happen, it's going to be one of the 3. It's going to be a minor change, it's going to be a change order, or it's going to be construction change directive. It's really important, really important to understand what those are. But I think a good example for a minor change could be, let's say you decide to change the paint color or something. So that is not going to impact the time. It's still the same amount of color, so it's not going to impact the cost. It's just a different wall, like a paint color or something. So that could be an example of a minor change. Change orders usually happen if there is if adjustment needs to happen in terms of cost or time, and usually it's going to be a contractor that is going to request a change order, and then the architect can talk to the owner about it and then essentially approve the change order, which means that either cost or time is going to be adjusted. And if you have a change order, that is a pretty in real life it may not be a big deal, but legally it is somewhat of a big deal, because remember how in the initial information we specifically said time and cost. So if we have a change order that requires us to update those things, we need to update them. So that's pretty important. And then construction change directive is essentially what happens if the owner and contractor cannot agree on something. So if, let's say, contractor says, a contractor file application for a change order requesting more money, let's say, because something happened and cost is going to go up, and they say, I cannot really order these windows because I need the money from you. And then the owner is going to say, well, I really don't agree. I don't think that should be that much of an increase. I think you are blowing up the numbers, or just if just they don't agree, then the architect will say to the contractor, okay, I will issue a construction change directive. And that means that the contractor will do, in that moment, will do what they have to do in order to deliver the project. But we kind of already anticipate that down the road there is going to be some dispute or claim that will have to be resolved, because with construction change directive, you're essentially saying, do what you have to do, we'll deal with the problems later, because we don't have time. We cannot afford to waste time. So yeah, that's essentially, in a nutshell, what that is. Okay, 3.6.5.2, the architect shall maintain records relative to changes in the work. Again, we're keeping the receipts, 3.6.6, project completion. 3.6.6.1, the architect shall, point 1, conduct inspections. So this is the first time that we're talking about inspections that an architect needs to do. So an architect shall, point 1, conduct inspections to determine the date or dates of substantial completion and the date of final completion. So yes, you are doing essentially 2 inspections, one for substantial completion and one for final completion. Really, really important to remember. Like anything else is not an inspection. Point 2, issue certificates of substantial completion. Point 3, forward to the owner for the owner's review and records written warranties and related documents required by the contract documents and received from the contractor. And point 4, issue a final certificate for payment based upon a final inspection indicating that, to the best of the architect's knowledge, information, and belief, the work complies with the requirements of the contract documents. So really, really important. Like at the project completion, these 4 things are what you need to do. So if it would be helpful for you to kind of like rewrite this paragraph so that you remember it better, do that, because I'm sure you will see questions that will deal with something from this paragraph. 3.6.6.2, the architect's inspections shall be conducted with the owner to check conformance of the work with the requirements of the contract documents and to verify the accuracy and completeness of the list submitted by the contractor of work to be completed or corrected. So again, like I'm really not a legal expert, but like I'm wondering if the fact that AIA is saying that you should conduct these inspections with the owner is kind of like in a way diluting the responsibility of the architect. But I don't have enough knowledge, but it's just something that I'm wondering. I think it's interesting that you do these inspections with the owner. Okay, 3.6.6.3, When substantial completion has been achieved, the architect shall inform the owner about the balance of the contract sum remaining to be paid to the contractor, including the amount to be retained from the contract sum, if any, for final completion or correction of the work. So this is going to be explained more in detail in A201, but essentially what it means when they say including the amount to be retained from the contract sum, that means that after substantial completion, in theory, like the contractor can say, well, it's substantially complete. That means you can occupy it, and I'm sort of off the hook, and I can just go and abandon. I'm finished here. It's substantially complete. But if the owner decides to retain a certain amount of money, at that point, that amount of money, in a sense, forces the contractor to arrive to the final completion when they get paid for their work plus that retained amount, that in a sense kind of like served as some kind of carrot in front of their nose to just kind of like finish it. Because like otherwise, if the contractor leaves, they're leaving money on the table. Okay, and I guess I should say that, like, I think later on in A201, like you will see that if the contractor defaults, like at the substantial completion or right after, like the owner can still hire somebody else. I mean, it will hire somebody else to bring the project to the very finish line. Okay. 3.6.6.4, the architect shall forward to the owner the following information received from the contractor: consent of surety or sureties, if any, to reduction in or potential release of retainage or the making of final payment. 2, affidavits, receipts, releases, and waivers of liens or bonds indemnifying the owner against liens. And 3, any other documentation required of the contractor under the contract documents. So this means that the contractor will forward all these information to the architect. Architect will review it and then forward to the owner. And these documents will give the owner a peace of mind that the owner is not going to be legally chased for something, for all these things that are explained. 3.6.6.5, upon request of the owner and prior to the expiration of 1 year from the date of substantial completion, the architect shall, without additional compensation, conduct a meeting with the owner to review the facility operations and performance. So this, I guess I should first say that this is different from what you will see under supplemental services post-occupancy evaluation, which is 4.1.1.17, because this meeting with the owner to review the facility operations and performance is much less, obviously much less formal, because, and the reason why it is without additional compensation is essentially because you, as an architect, certainly benefit a lot from it, because within 1 year of substantial completion, not the final completion, substantial completion, you kind of have this ability to learn about performance of the building, if there are any problems or not. And it's also good from the marketing perspective to do that. But here it says upon request of the owner, but as I kind of like implied, that you can certainly approach the owner and ask for a meeting and review of the facility operations, for your own purposes. So yeah, I think with that we conclude Article 3. As you can see, there's a lot in this article, and as it is there to describe basic services through early SD to the very end. And as you can see, the SD and DD are sort of like easy and to the point, but then as soon as the contractor um, gets in the game, it kind of gets a little more complex. But at the same time, it's not something extremely unachievable. So yeah, but then generally A201 will go in more specific details of these things, and as you study A201, you will just see how B101 and A201 how they drive together. So yeah, that's that for this video. Bye.